Good morning, everyone. My name's Alexandra Morgan, and I have the privilege of being the CEO at Family House. We're all here, and I welcome you to honor and remember our wonderful founder, friend and mentor, Dr. Art Ablin. We all have important stories about Art and what he meant to us. And as his family planned, this would have been Art's 91st birthday today, November 1st. So we gather not just to memorialize Art, but to celebrate his life as well. It's so far felt a little bit like a family gathering, which, you know, at Family House and Art being Art, it probably is. And to that end, the feeling of family, to continue the feeling of family, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who's our wonderful UCSF Chancellor, Sam Hawgood. Sam and Art knew each other for a very long time. They were pediatricians together. And Art celebrated every success in Sam's career, from pediatrician to chief of pediatrics to dean of medicine, and now our amazing chancellor. There's a quote by Goethe that Art liked that said, "Who is the happiest of men? He who values the merits of others and in their pleasure takes joy, even as though it were his own." And that is the way that Art felt about you, Sam. So I welcome you to come up.
Thank you, Alexandra, and good morning, everyone. It's truly a deeply humbling experience for me to begin this celebration of the life of a truly remarkable man. I speak first as a friend and colleague of Art's, as Alexandra mentioned, but I also speak on behalf of the entire UCSF community, a community that Art served with great grace and distinction for his entire professional career. Simply put, Art Ablin was a hero of mine, a man who lived a life of true honor and purpose, a life of caring and service that epitomized the ideals of a physician and a servant leader, a life that touched and made better everyone he encountered, cared for, taught, mentored, and nurtured. A life that has left a legacy in Family House that will live forever. A legacy that will continue to touch lives and relieve suffering for generations to come. Generations that will never know Art, the person, but will nevertheless benefit from his vision and compassion. So let me just briefly set the stage for those who will speak after me and describe Art, the UCSF faculty member, and then I'll end with a few personal reflections. Professor Art Ablin was a pioneer in the field of pediatric hematology oncology. Art received his medical degree from the University of Michigan and then completed residency training in Michigan and at UCSF. As a member of the UCSF faculty, Art joined colleagues Seymour Zoga and Joseph Kushner in developing our very first clinical oncology programs for pediatric patients. And then with the support of hematologist Bill Mentzer, that you'll hear from in just a bit, and Peter Dolman, the program ultimately grew into the renowned UCSF Division of Hematology Oncology, arguably one of the very best programs in the world. Art was a highly accomplished clinical investigator. He helped organize what was called the Children's Cancer Study Group, a national organization that drove almost every child with pediatric cancer into a clinical trial, and contributed as such to many of the remarkable advances in pediatric cancer treatment from the 1960s through the 1990s. He was one of the first investigators to appreciate and grapple with the adverse late health effects of chemotherapy and radiation, and he organized the UCSF Survivors of Childhood Cancer program. Now, pediatric cancer was a tough, emotionally wrenching discipline when Art began his career. We knew little about the biology of cancer and had very few tools in our toolbox to treat the youngest patients, most of whom died. I know it was a source of enormous pride and satisfaction for Art to participate in a remarkable transformation of that story. Huge progress was made in our understanding of the scientific basis of pediatric cancer, the treatments we had to offer, and most important, the survival of now the majority of patients with pediatric cancer. The experience of supporting families through tragic loss early in his career helped inspire Art's long-lasting interest in palliative care. It also impressed upon him the importance of a supportive environment for families during treatment. And to meet that need, as most of you know, Art and his wonderful wife, Debbie, founded Family House across the street from the hospital then on Parnassus Heights in 1981. And as you all know, in 2016, thanks in huge part to Art's tireless and from personal experience, impassioned efforts, the organization moved into this wonderful, magical Nancy and Stephen Grand Family House where we sit today. Art was also a teacher, as you'll hear from Kate, and role model to generation of young physicians, teaching them not just the science of medicine, but critically important, the art of medicine. His bedside manner was truly unparalleled, and in the most gracious of ways, he made us all who learned from him better, more humane physicians, a very long-lasting gift to the world. Now, I said at the beginning that Art was a hero of mine. To me, he epitomized all that I aspire to be as a physician and as a person. He led and influenced by example, always striving for the best for his patients and their families, always taking the higher path, and always gracious, always genial, and always humble. His humanity was palpable. I associate two words with Art: empathy and courage. Empathy for all, no matter what, and courage to always do what was right, no matter what the obstacles may be. So let me end by reading a quote from George Bernard Shaw, reflecting on a life well lived. "This is the true joy of life, the being used up for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. So Art, your life was no brief candle, but was without doubt a splendid torch. We miss you, but thank you for making our lives better and brighter. Thank you."
Sam, thank you so much, and thank you for reorganizing your schedule today to be here. I'd next like to welcome up Kate Matthay, who is the Chief of Pediatric Oncology at UCSF, and did I get it wrong? Oh. Mignon, sorry. What I can say is that Kate was a highly respected and very dear friend of Art's, and revered your work so much. So if you would come up and say something, I won't get your title wrong then.
Thank you, Alexandra. And it was Art who made me the chief for many, many years. And what makes me feel so happy today instead of sad is seeing all his former patients who have come to honor him. So thank you for showing up because he meant so much to all of us. And it is, again, so appropriate to have the memorial here, which is a tribute to Art's love and compassion. I wanted to share some of my early memories because I first met Art in 1976 when I interviewed with him and Dr. Mentzer and Dr. Dahlman for a fellowship in pediatric hematology oncology at UCSF. And I was at that time 8 months pregnant. So it was a somewhat difficult interview, and I'm not sure that Art was really impressed with me because they accepted me, but he called me when I was 2 weeks postpartum from a C-section and said, I need to see you right away. The NIH cut funding, and I'm not sure that we're going to pay for your fellowship because you probably are not going to come to work anyway. So it wasn't quite like that, but I had to borrow clothes from my mother because I was still a little larger than normal, and I met Art. He was very kind and met me in Marin at his office, so I wouldn't have to go so far. And he said, I just want to be sure, because we have to raise money now for your fellowship, that you really are coming to work and you're not going to be a stay-at-home mom. And I thought, God, who is this old-fashioned guy? I didn't know then he had 2 daughters who were going to become a lawyer and a doctor, but I soon found that I was completely wrong, and he was the most supportive person throughout my career. And in fact, in the last week of his life when we visited him, he said, Kate walks on water. And he always said that to people and supported me to move up and do my research and take over oncology. So it was, his really old-fashioned nature was manifest, as Sam said, as an extreme humility and extreme politeness at all times and courtesy to everybody, which is sometimes lacking in other people that we hear about today. So when I did begin to train with him, I found out how selfless he was and how hardworking. And I could not stand up on rounds as long as Art could. Even though his legs sometimes bothered him, he would never sit down. I would call him when I was on call at night at 1 a.m, and he would say, howdy, Art Ablin, as if he'd never been asleep. He would talk to me, advise me, and often come in at odd times on weekends and in the middle of the night because he gave his all for his patients. And he sometimes would call me from his private office before he was full-time at UC, and he'd say, I have a new child with, I think has leukemia, who's coming in the hospital. And he'd say, but please call me back. This call is on my dime. This was before cell phones. He said, I want to save money, so use the hospital phone. But more seriously, Art would teach me how to talk to the newly diagnosed child. He taught all of us, I think, how to show compassion and yet be completely honest about the expected treatment, the outcome, the side effects. And when children had had a relapse or a more severe problem, he really helped families to make a compassionate decision. He explained to them the difference between treatment, what we think of treatment as chemotherapy, and treatment for comfort, and really helping families through these times. His concern for families and all the problems they might face at the diagnosis of a child with cancer is really what led him to start the Family House and have a place for families to relieve their stress, to share things, and have a place they could stay without having to pay for a hotel. He also helped build our program academically. He taught us how to do clinical research, and he was a model teacher. He always explained things from the beginning to students and residents. He built our team approach to taking care of children. Gail Perin will tell you about our team-directed bedside rounds where the parents, as well as the students, the residents, and the nurses were all part of the team helping to take care of this child. He started our pediatric multidisciplinary tumor board, which continues today and brings in surgeons, radiation therapists, pathologists from all parts of the hospital to work together to help children. And I always loved the occasional ride in his convertible sports car. I don't know what happened to that, but we would drive to Oakland Children's sometimes for tumor board there, which he also organized and collaborated. So he really helped me also to develop my clinical research career, as well as many others in our group. He was a great mentor to Rob Goldsby and helped him to establish our wonderful survivor clinic. And he was Kevin Shannon's mentor, who's now a leader in leukemia research. So he also, the other thing that Art taught me was to really get into the international scene. He loved to host international students. Debbie and he put students and patients up at their home frequently. And he introduced me to the International Society of Pediatric Oncology, where he was a very prominent member and loved traveling all over the world to these meetings, and introduced me to that group when he hosted the meeting here in 1993. And he also spoke a lot about the time that he and his family spent training on sabbatical in Switzerland, and in fact urged me to take 3 sabbaticals in France. And finally, Art has been a really good family friend. I developed an acute abdomen one day, and he called him on a Saturday, and he met us in the hospital, went into the operating room with me, and was very happy when he told me I didn't have cancer in my ovary. It was just a cyst. But he just dropped everything and came in, and that's the kind of friend he was, a friend to my children, taught me about bird watching, and also was extremely good about maternity leaves for my other children and made sure I was covered when there was no policy at UCSF. So it's hard to think of an area that Art has not touched or been a role model for at our hospital and in life. I never go to talk with a family or go to tumor board without thinking of how he would respond or deal with a situation. And I try to emulate his thoughtful teaching methods, but sometimes speak a little more quickly than he did. So above all, I think what I remember most is his delight and skill in dealing with children. He just loved children, and that came across all the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, and you won't be surprised to know that Art offered the sports car for auction at a family house event. I would now like to invite up Dr. Mentzer, who is Professor Emeritus at UCSF. I think I got that one right, who is a longtime colleague and valued friend of Art. So, Dr. Mentzer, please come up.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the family and for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to see so many people that I know here from the previous years. Art and I were colleagues in the Division of Pediatric Hematology Oncology at UCSF for 40 years. In the 1970s and 80s, I was responsible for the care of children with cancer at San Francisco General Hospital, and Art was the doctor I relied on for advice and support in this endeavor, since I was trained as a hematologist, not an oncologist. There was an unequal relationship because Art was such a well-rounded, intelligent clinician, as you've already heard, that it was only rarely that I could reciprocate and offer him medical advice. His years as a general pediatrician gave him an easy way with children and parents. In fact, Art was my children's pediatrician. Our friendship grew after we both stepped back from years of service to UCSF as clinicians, teachers, and researchers. We found common ground in our interest in the broader world around us. We took courses together in the Boucher Lifelong Learning Institute in Marin and were particularly interested in the developments in subatomic physics, astrobiology, and astronomy that had occurred since we were undergraduates long ago. The recent discovery of over 5,000 exoplanets circling other stars, some within the habitable zone that could support life, changed our view of the place of humanity in the universe, much as did the earlier discoveries of Copernicus and Galileo. Not limiting our interest to science, we also took courses together in the operas of Gilbert and Sullivan, ethics, the evolution of man, and the role of myths in modern society, among other topics. Art was a diligent student who was not satisfied unless he fully understood what was being taught. He also enjoyed having a good time and joined in lustily in singing songs from the 30s and 40s at the monthly jazz concerts held by Gary and Jerry Spolter at the 19 Broadway, where's Jerry? He's around here somewhere, at the 19 Broadway Bar in Fairfax. His diligence and perseverance became particularly evident when we both started taking Spanish lessons a few years ago at the Sun Spanish School in Kentfield, run by Jacek Machnowski. Jacek has written a lovely tribute to Art included in your handout. I will just say that Art was never satisfied unless he completely understood the grammar and word meaning of complex sentences. At times, I felt this focus on detail hindered the overall meaning of what was being said. But it just reflected Art's drive for perfection, a quality he exhibited all his adult life. I greatly admired Art's courage and fortitude in coping with illness and disability. I rarely heard him complain about the medical problems that limited his mobility. In fact, he called them privileges, feeling that he was grateful to be alive and able to experience them. These physical limitations did not extend to his mind, which remained sharp and interested in the world around him. We generally saw things the same way, so even though we loved to argue, we didn't have many opportunities to do so. I remember a dinner at Art and Debbie's house one night recently where Art posed the question of whether the world was a better or worse place than it had been in the past. And I might make a footnote, you might answer differently today than a year ago. Art and I took the positive view, while Debbie and my friend Mary Ellen took the negative. Nothing was resolved, but we all felt enlivened by the experience. Art's positive point of view was typical of him. As a longtime friend, I was often invited to join Art and Debbie for dinner at their beautiful home in San Rafael. Art took particular pride in his lovely garden and his extensive collection of ferns. He and Debbie were gracious hosts, and their commitment to each other was evident. Theirs appeared to me to be an ideal marriage, and the support of Debbie and her daughters must have greatly eased his difficult final days. He was a lucky man to have found Debbie and convinced her to marry him. To have two daughters as accomplished as Ricky and Kelly was in part a tribute to Art and Debbie. Using Art's own favorite word, it was a great privilege to have been his colleague and friend over the years. I will miss his enthusiasm and curiosity about life, his wisdom, and his friendship greatly. In Spanish, al fin me gustaría decir Arturo vaya con Dios.
Thanks, Dr. Mentzer. I would now like to invite up Gail Perin, who worked with Art for so many years, was a dear friend along with her husband David to Art and Debbie, and it means so much that you came all the way from Washington State to be here. So please welcome Gail Perin.
Good morning. Debbie, Kelly, Rebecca, Annie, family, and friends. Having worked with Art for 25 years, and after 45 years of friendship, it's a privilege to share my many memories. During the time I knew him, Art contributed so much professionally and touched so many lives at UCSF that last year, Janet Veach and I prepared to nominate him for the UCSF Medal of Honor, honoring his innovative practice and enduring legacy as a pediatric oncologist. While researching information for the nomination, we learned what some of you already know. In addition to his tireless work for patients, families, medical, and nursing colleagues, he also worked in support of physician education, as you've heard, research, and scholarly activities nationally, locally, and internationally, all designed to impact physical and mental health. Art's unique and lasting contributions to UCSF, pediatric oncology, clinical research, physician education, and community service have encompassed many firsts. He helped to elevate the institution and the practice that show to where it is today. Every day, Art witnessed the devastation and the sadness that children and their families faced on a day-to-day basis as they fought to accept and change the disease that had upended their life. It was his compassion that drove him to lessen this pain, developing comprehensive care solutions and support services to empower patients and their families to cope and engage in their course of treatment. He also was a pioneer in the profession with the first pediatric, and actually as I see all you hematologists in front, I'll edit this if I need to. He started one of the first, he and Joe Kushner and Seymour Zoger, I think, started the first hematology clinic in 1958, which was the beginning for him at UCSF. He established the oncology program in 1970, and he left Marin to come to UC full-time. Soon after, he brought UC into the forefront of clinical trials. He improved outcome in cancer services and survival throughout his career, helping to build a multidisciplinary team and a clinical program. There are now hundreds of children who are served and continue care at our Center of Excellence. All this was accomplished while he continued to care for patients at the bedside and in the clinic, not off in some ivory tower. He was a role model in implementing his innovative care and empowering patients and families to help chart their own future. Later research showed that this was so important that patients felt a locus of control and that they were engaged in their treatment in order for them to come out the other end reasonably whole. As a young master's prepared nurse working in oncology, Art inspired me to appreciate his care and his vision of what oncology care could be. He helped me set the trajectory of my career by supporting a grant to the American Cancer Society to become the first clinical nurse specialist at UCSF. Opening the door for this new position gave me the privilege and the opportunity to be part of his commitment to establish family-centered care and pioneering true interdisciplinary teamwork. In the 1970s, this was not only novel to UCSF, it was novel across the country. He worked tirelessly to compose a team of physicians, clinical nurse specialists, social workers, and psychologists. He continued to augment this team as the needs arose for children and family. Many of us will remember some of his real highlights. The initial diagnostic conference, which I felt was one of his greatest contributions. He was always inclusive, supportive, and of course, a wonderful teacher, not only to the families by including them in what was happening with their care, but also including house officers, the staff nurses, and family members. I remember one conference where 19 family members showed up, and he just sent people getting chairs so that everybody could be in on this conference. Our patient family handbook was an important asset to our team, and this helped patients navigate the care demands of sometimes some very intensive therapies. Bedside rounds were helpful to all of us, not only to the families, obviously that they were paramount, but also that all the rest of us would be on the same page, and so patients wouldn't be getting lots of different comments from different parts of the team that didn't jive. The school reentry program was really important, and he felt that kids with cancer should be treated as normally as possible and should have the normalcy of childhood. Hospice and death program was available whenever our objectives and goals changed for patients. Long-term survivor clinic was very important. Bereavement weekends, which we did both for staff and for families, was very, very helpful. And of course, where we're sitting and the enormous amount of support that families get through Family House. Art dedicated more than 60 years of untiring and personal philanthropy to improving the lives of children and their families. This whole time, Art had the consummate support and team at home. Debbie, Kelly, Reckie were there for him with love, kindness, diversion from work, always a home of rest and support, and not getting away with too much. He truly stands as a hero in children's cancer. He championed and fostered UCSF preeminence in the care of childhood cancer. And to all those who had the privilege of working with him, it was truly a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gail. That was lovely. If there's any measure of really how wonderful somebody's life is, it's how amazing their family is. And over the past 16 years, it's been such a pleasure to know not only Art, but his family. And daughter one, I would like to invite Kelly Sultan up, who is one of the most loving and kind people. Big surprise coming from your parents, but what a pleasure to introduce Kelly Sultan.
First of all, Debbie, my sister, Rebecca, and I would like to thank each one of you for stopping in the middle of this lovely weekday to come and help us remember Art. And it's so very deeply appreciated by us, so thank you very much. Art's nieces and nephews are here in the audience. They've come from as far south as Bakersfield and up from Sonora. Gail came from Washington. So thank you all. We'd also like to, of course, thank the speakers that came today and prepared their remarks, and the entire staff of Family House. This was an all-family event that made this happen. Chairs unfolded and water bottles distributed. So this was a really lovely, lovely expression of everyone's support. There are a few people in Family House that went above and beyond to make this happen. Joey Kotvika, Kevin Erdman, Allison Blom, and let's see, I don't want to forget anybody, Chris Smith, Jessica Krieger, who actually rearranged her 20th year anniversary luncheon that was to be held today. So congratulations, Jessica, on your 20 years at Family House. And of course, Alexandra Morgan, the CEO of Family House. And Alexandra not only organized today's event, but simultaneously juggled the annual Family House Gala and, by the way, her own wedding, almost all simultaneously. So it's kind of a wonder that our box lunches didn't end up at Alexandra's wedding guests' lunch, and that we're not selling raffle tickets and eating wedding cake. So, Alexandra, thank you. Lovely, lovely job. Thank you. Now I'd like to share with you Art's to-do list. Number 1, skip childhood. Go straight to work at your parents' wholesale fish market every day after school until you leave home. Number 2, never miss an opportunity to repeat the price lobster used to sell for when you were a kid. Number 3, always remember the worst shame you ever experienced when your father said he was disappointed in you because you didn't show up to work one day. Number 4, accept your mother's decision to enroll you in school nearly 2 years before you were of age. Number 5, accept the fact that your mother showed her love by seeing your adult future self, not your present boy self. Number 5, Number 6, spend only the barest minute wondering if this is exactly the same as unconditional love, but consider lingering there any longer self-indulgent. Number 7, remain best friends your entire life with Ted Smith, world champion baton twirler in the high school marching band. Rely upon Ted's gallant ease to attract the girls willing to double date. Number 8, stand as tall as possible so no one suspects you are 14 when you graduate from high school. Number 9, become inspired during a residency in pediatrics to devote yourself to healing the wounded child. Number 10, on the very first night as a resident on call at Philadelphia General, experience the soon-to-be oft-told elevator story. Number 11, cherish working at your desk during magic hour, which lasts from the time they've all gone upstairs to bed until 1 or 2 in the morning. Number 12, adore your big brother George your entire life and miss him the most at 12:30 in the morning when he would always call to talk real estate investments, Bakersfield politics, and how to get the best deal on airline tickets. Number 13, exuberantly offer to take your family out to dinner, but only take them to restaurants most desperate for business because they need the customers. Number 14, tell the elevator story. Number 15, loudly whistle the movie's theme song as you exit the theater. Embarrass your young daughters to no end. Number 16, suggest a family trip to San Francisco to go antique shopping. After hours in the shop reminding them not to touch, finally cave and take them for a Zim burger at Zim's. Number 17, grab your daughter's hands on your way to the movies and skip down the sidewalk with them, sort of, because they're kind of short and your shoes are actually as big as their legs, so you have to hop more than skip, which confuses them because they know you think you're skipping, but you're actually looking more like a giant kid in a suit and tie that seems to be on an invisible pogo stick. Number 18, tell the elevator story. Number 19, intend but never actually go directly to the airport. Always remember at the last minute you left something at UC, and tell your family it will only take a minute to stop in on the way. Go up to the 6th floor. Immediately forget you are on the way to the airport. Forget you have a car full of family waiting. Forget you even have a family. Be the very last people to board the flight. Consider it an absolutely massive success because you didn't waste 1 minute waiting to board. Number 20, when you talk to your wife and daughters, use the Quaker plain language you picked up from your Pennsylvania farm girl wife. Even though you are Jewish, born and raised in a Chicago hotel room, but for some reason revert back to Chicago speak when you are annoyed with them or discussing chores or allowances. Number 21, take your family to Europe for your sabbatical. Truly believe it's a good idea to enroll your daughters in the local public school just for a few torturous months when they are torturously pre-adolescent and when they don't speak a word of French. Number 22, late at night, each February 13th, hand-make valentines for your wife and daughters during magic hour with supplies from your desk drawer by meticulously outlining overlapping bubble letters and coloring them in with a pink highlighter. Sign, Guess Who, under a little drawing of your face, which somehow you manage with just 2 dots, a vertical line, and a curved smile to make look exactly like you. Number 23, tell the elevator story. Number 24, sit in the passenger seat and read every single sign out loud. Number 25, insist upon laboriously practicing the subjunctive tense in Spanish with the gardener, who speaks perfect English. Number 26, continue to call him McGill for 15 years, even though his name is Miguel. Also pronounce Mercedes, Mercedes. Chinese, Chinese. California, California. Monoclonal antibodies, monoclonal antibodies. Number 27, insist upon putting McGill's son through community college. 29, never ever accept no from anyone without adequate explanation. Help them understand that 9.9 times out of 10, they were mistaken and they actually meant to say yes. Number 30, show ultimate respect for each member of the family because the disease affects the entire family. Never walk away until they have an understanding of the disease, the treatment, the side effects, and have realistic hopes, not wishes, about the future. Use scientific method to prove to yourself they understand by having them repeat the explanation back to you. Also, let them keep all the drawings you made illustrating how blood cells and platelets differ and how chemo works. Number 31, repeat over and over how privileged you feel that you don't go to work. You simply do what you love. Number 32, tell the elevator story. Number 33, never miss an opportunity to help a medical student be a better and more compassionate practitioner, not even when you are 91, hospitalized, and too weak to hold a paper cup filled with ice chips. Ask your daughter to retrieve the folder from your desk at home that you compiled while correctly diagnosing yourself with acute polycythemia and a rare genetic mutation, acute myeloproliferative neoplasia. Then, from your hospital bed, present said folder to the medical student assigned to your case for her to study later. Number 34, be a gentleman always. Number 35, because you have always been a gentleman, offer to culture the unrefrigerated stool sample for that attractive med tech in the lab at Philadelphia General. Never mind that you are a resident and she's just a med tech. There's something about her. Recognize you just met the woman who will show you more than you could ever learn on your own, who will allow you to follow your demanding dream of healing and give you a solid, warm, and loving family to return to each night. Recognize you just met the woman who has the strength and grace and wisdom inspired by growing up in just such a family, and that she was born knowing the essential things that make for a meaningful life. Number 36, tell the grandchildren the elevator story. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. That was beautiful. And you brought art. You brought art to the table. Now I would like to introduce daughter number 2, Rebecca, who's here from New York with her beautiful daughter, Annie, Art and Debbie's granddaughter. And once again, I just have to say how much I adore you both, and Debbie and Art's family. It's such a privilege, really, to know you.
Well, the best way to honor my father is to tick off at least one thing on his to-do list, because if nothing else, he would want me to be productive. So I'm going to tell the elevator story. Now, Art always told the story as if it were the first time, as if you hadn't heard it over and over and over. I'm sure he even had a Spanish version. He told it so many times, I will confess I stopped listening. But here it comes. When Art was on the first day of his rotation at Philadelphia General, he was called to minister to a woman who was dying. He had to travel from the first floor to the third floor on a notoriously creaky and slow elevator. When he got on the elevator, he was anxious. He was sweaty-palmed, he felt unable, and he felt too new to medicine to be able to save his patient. He was also alone. Apparently in Philadelphia General in those days, there was no attending. So during this prolonged ride in the elevator, he realized that his anxiety was only about himself. It was not about his patient. His goal, he told himself, and to all listeners of the story, was to help his patient and not to be concerned for himself. Fear, he told himself, was, now say it with me, a luxury he couldn't afford. When he got off the elevator, he left his fear behind him and he strode down to the patient calmly. Now, I heard the elevator story before math exams. I heard it when I gave a speech to run for class president. I heard it when I took my road test when I was 16. I heard it before I left for college, and I heard it on ski lifts. I heard it twice before taking the bar exam. And if I had given him an inch, which I very rarely did, I'm sure I would have heard it before my first trial. Art told us the story, I believe, to show support, but it didn't really feel supportive. It felt like there was a warning there that there were luxuries that you just can't afford. Now, Art was a tough guy with a really tough job. Dinnertime conversation at our house was seasoned with words like vincristine and rhabdomyosarcoma and the life expectancies of 4-year-old children. When other fathers were watching the game or building go-karts with their kids, mine was at the hospital because kids were dying. Kids were dying with these horrible, crazy illnesses that snuck up on them when they weren't looking. You couldn't guard against it by behaving well. You couldn't guard against it by eating the right food. I grew up thinking that really the only thing between these kids' lives and their death was my father. Even if it felt like he was some sort of Ashkenazi superhero, I had more than a twinge of envy. Was it selfish, or was it churlish, or was it just predictable that I wished that my father was Atticus Finch, sitting on our front porch drinking lemonade and taking the time to kill the rabid dogs that haunted my limited life, to be a sure shot against the scary things that inhabited a healthy daughter's world: skinned knees, flat tires, broken hearts. Art gave his all to be with his work and to his patients. And he could afford that particular luxury because he had Debbie at home in Marin, making our world safe. We had a childhood of just picked blackberry juice dripping down our arms, making our own root beer, and feeding tame squirrels and Angora goats and rabbits that burrowed outside under the clothesline and emerged 10 times more numerous. We had homemade Halloween costumes and hikes on Mount Tam and hot fudge sundaes for dinner when Art was at medical society meetings on Tuesday. Debbie knows intuitively what every writer spends a lifetime trying to learn. Show, don't tell your story. I might have been able to take a decent medical history over the phone when it was my turn to answer the incessantly ringing phone. But I also knew how to make sleds out of cardboard boxes to slide down on summer hillsides. There are terrible illnesses that kill young children, but if you're lucky enough not to be tapped for that torture, there is a world out there to eat up. Art could be the hero because he had Debbie. While we honor Art today for all he accomplished, and he deserves every ounce of that honor, I want to remember that she made that possible. She gave him wind for his sails and the loft that he needed to stay afloat. At the same time, she made our world safe. There was a reason that Art was drawn to the work that he did, this difficult, this heartbreaking, this wrenching work. There was a reason that he told the elevator story so many times that it became translucent with age. The story may not be so much about conquering your fears, but about turning your back on them. Art on that elevator, I believe, wanted to be a doctor that he feared he couldn't be. Maybe it was because there were only 3 floors, but he didn't allow himself to ask why. Why did he fear he couldn't be that doctor? Why did he fear he couldn't be enough? So if I could add to his to-do list, I would ask Art to listen to himself more, to make friends with himself, and to look those demons in the face instead of allowing them to hound him. I would wish for him a few more floors in that elevator so he could shut down those demons. He might have allowed himself the luxury not only of being afraid, but of being enough. So I challenge all of us to do that. I challenge us to turn around and look at the elevator doors before they close. And then embrace our children, our spouses, our loved ones, as well as our patients and our clients, because we're all afraid. It's okay to be afraid. We're all flawed. We're all less than we wish. But maybe we're all much, much more than we fear. I sent flowers to Art from New York shortly before he died. The day before had been really scary. He told me he didn't think he'd live through it. But he did, and I sent him flowers with a relief that he hadn't died, but with the knowledge that he surely would soon. I felt small. I felt far away. I felt very, very afraid. And my card read, "Tell me the elevator story again," because I wanted him to know I was still listening.
What an incredibly amazing and what a lot to share with us. Thank you. I'm going to say a few words, and then we're going to show a quick video about art, and then I'll give you a little instruction about lunch. Art told me many, many times that he wanted to live long enough to see this building open. And thank God he did. And he lived obviously well beyond that and came as often as he could to see the families and the children really enjoying this place. So what I've told Debbie and Art many times over the past 16 years is what an honor and a privilege, to use Art's word, it is to take my turn at shepherding this precious jewel of a place that they envisioned so many years ago. Anyone who knew Art also loved Debbie. And I'm going to say that sentence again. Anyone who knew Art also loved Debbie because of what Recky and Kelly just said, how Debbie, even at Family House, kept the home fires burning. So there was this thing like if you wanted to get something done and you knew Art maybe wasn't in favor of spending the money, you'd go to Debbie and say, Debbie, don't you think it's a good idea? And she'd say, I understand. And a day or two later, Art would come around and say, you know, I've rethought that, Alexandra, and I think maybe, you know, we should go ahead and do it. So Debbie, for all the years that you were my partner, mwah, thank you. Partners in life, they work together with so many others, volunteering countless hours to make Family House a reality. They traveled the world, raised 2 exquisite daughters, enjoyed their 6 grandchildren. And for those of us who had the unbelievable pleasure of working with Art and Debbie, we all know that they still have a combined wisdom, humor. How many April Fool's jokes did Debbie make me play on Art? And really a loving spirit that infused every aspect of our organization here. Out of a desire to provide the family-centered care that we've heard so much about already in partnership with UCSF, Family House was created to provide compassionate housing, meals, emotional support, and other basic needs for families of seriously ill children. And it was developed at that time for a very good reason. In the 1970s, some pediatric cancers were finally treatable, which meant that parents needed to stay near their children. Art and his colleagues noticed that many families were sleeping in their cars, certainly in hospital waiting rooms. And then they had this weird system. There was a hospital conference room, and they had mats, and they draw straws, and the lucky ones got to sleep on the mat, which you weren't lucky to sleep on these mats, let me tell you, because I saw them. But it was a place to stay inside the hospital. And that's really what generated their desire to create Family House with other physicians, nurses, parents, many of whom are here. Clearly, these people were unable to pay for a place to stay in San Francisco and knew nobody. Otherwise, they'd be staying. The social workers say at the hospital to this day, if you've got a friend's cousin's uncle who you can sleep on the floor, go stay there. And so Art and Debbie and others had a vision to never have to say no to anybody who needed compassionate housing. And fortunately today, because of this building, the efforts of so many of you here, certainly Art, it's a reality. And I know many of us have goals that we would like to achieve, but Art was a real doer. And when he said he was going to do something, he did it. Thank God. As Art said, Family House was set up as a cost-free place for families to stay, but also as a communal experience so these families could share with each other what they were going through. As many of you know better than I, isolation is something that really strikes families when the entire family, as Art said, was diagnosed with a pediatric cancer. and Family House was an antidote to that. So in 1981, Art and others purchased our first little building at 50 Irving Street for $500,000. Could you imagine that now? And we sold it for $4 million. Art was ecstatic. They opened the first Family House in 1981 with just 9 bedrooms, later 10, across from UCSF Children's Hospital, which became UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital. The building was operated and run by volunteers, board members in the beginning years. And now 36 years later after that opened, we've got 30 employees. I think there may be a couple more than 30, but they don't all work full-time. We've got 3,000 volunteers and a truly stellar board of directors. And Art was proud of every single one who had anything to do with Family House. And through this effort is able to realize the goal that we could not only serve every family who needs us, but we have become a kind of model, and since opening have provided a tremendous amount of technical assistance to other pediatric guest houses around the country who are either trying to reinvigorate themselves or get started. And that has been a true pleasure to be able to tell the story of how we started and to provide the experience and wisdom that Art embodied. So thanks to people like the Grands, Art was able to realize his goal to live to see this building. And we've been pretty successful in our mission. Since 1981, we've housed approximately 50,000 families who would have not otherwise had a place to stay. And I can tell you that when it came to Family House, Art left it all on the field. If there was anything we can do, and you can ask any of us at the house, if we can figure out what to do to better serve the families, we do it. And that comes from Art. When you think about how do you make decisions about running Family House, think of what Art and Debbie would do. And that means that you always take the high road. And it's a pretty clear distinction, and it's a gift to be able to have that sort of guiding light. I think that Art was particularly proud of the work that he did to put both Family House and Camp Okizu on firm leadership and financial footing to grow capacity and to establish opportunities for new pediatric oncologists to be involved in both organizations. And I bring up Camp Okizu, John Bell is here, because Art really saw a child's life as an entire life. And as somebody else said, he wanted these children to experience normalcy. And I'm going to take a quick pause here and say that Art was a terrific fundraiser. And I bet there's nobody in this room, including the guy who's doing the sound, who hasn't been asked for money by Art, or me. And I want to say that Art taught me a lot about how to tell the story and then let people make the right decision. This place wouldn't be here without Art. And you can say the first 2 buildings wouldn't have been here, and certainly many others came in with tremendously generous donations to make this place a reality. But Art was the heart and soul of Family House. And so I think that there is one thing that we can all do to honor Art's life, and that is another quote by Goethe, because you told me you like Goethe one day. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. So the greatest honor we can pay Art is to live our lives in the way that he did, with compassion and civility. So on behalf of the board of directors, the staff, and especially the families, so many thanks to each one of you for being here to honor Art's life. We're going to watch a quick video, and then I'll give you lunch instructions.
over my almost 50 years of being a medical practitioner and taking care of kids with cancer, I've had some marvelous experiences.
I started working at Family House when I was 15 years old, and I loved, for all these years I worked alongside with Art.
Every time Art recognized me with all the hundreds and thousands of people he's known, there's just no one as special as both Art and Debbie.
As a mentor, he's shown me how to care. He's shown me how to listen. He's shown me how to give. And he's shown me how to be a professional.
Not only is he a doctor who helps working on curing the illness, he wants to treat the whole family in a holistic way and make sure that the family remains as a unit and can help support each other.
I mean, let's face it, who's done more for our families than Art has?
We really were a pioneer for all these extra support systems. Thank you for all your many years of collaboration, kindness, and friendship.
If you can participate in something like this, this is the best thing I've ever been involved in my life.
What has happened has exceeded almost my fondest expectations. It's, you know, over the top, over the top. I've given a lot of thought to what I want to do with the rest of the days or weeks or months or maybe a year or two that I have. And I think that the most important thing is to being able to do something for my family. Secondly, to be able to be fortunate enough to do something for somebody else. And the other thing, I guess, is just to have fun.
First, thank all of you for attending something which all of us feel very heartfelt about. I think I probably have one of the records here of knowing Art, not the longest, but let's say the longest professionally. I think other people here have known him a lot longer. Art and I started way back when we were residents at UCSF. I hate to think about how long ago it was. It was about 1955, over 60 years ago. And at that time, we were good friends. And what happened was that I went on to get an experience with a fellowship in oncology and came back, and Art and I became very good friends with oncology early on. And I have to tell you a quick story of how chemotherapy got started. But I'm not going to tell you that story because I want to make a toast to Art instead. And let me just say that the first family house I have to tell you a quick story about with Art's input, namely that the gentleman named Joe Corrette invented, all of you that look down at your pants, there's a crease. That was called a corretized initial investment of this. So what happened was that we were trying to get the Correttes to fund the first family house. And I had known the Susan Corrett, Joe Corrett's wife, I made her at a bridge game. And I said, I'm going to call Susan at home to see if I can't get her to contribute her husband's to the first family house. Well, Art says, you can't do that. I said, well, let me try. Anyway, long story short, the first family house was called Corrett Family House. And from that was, as I say, in the mid-50s, long time ago. Well, since that time, this beautiful place has grown through Art and Debbie's extremely hard work, financial backing, but heart. And all of you know that. And I want to thank all of you here that have been contributing to Art's love, namely the family house. So here's to the Grands. I want to toast them in particular at this time. Well, now back to toasting Art. I think many of you should be standing up here making this first toast to Art, and probably a lot better than me. But I was been honored to be able to say that Art was a really my role model. And he was a mentor to many of us, and I must say that we all loved him dearly. You heard the elevator story. I'm going to tell you the privilege story. One of Art's really wonderful statement was, it's a privilege to be alive and to be able to work in this world. So I want to make this first toast to Art Ablin, my mentor, one of my dearest friends, someone who I'll always admire, and toast Art for the wonderful beginning and this wonderful stage of Art's development. Here's to Art Ablin.
Cheers.